So right now in our Anim blueprint, we have a very simple animation graph. Basically, he can move forward, and then we have the aim applied as an additive. The next thing I want to introduce is the concept of a state machine. Now, what a state machine is it's a mathematical construct that basically says that the character can only be in one state at a given time. Now, what do I mean by a state? Well, right now he's standing, but let's say, for example, that we wanted him to go into a crouch move. Well, he can't be standing and crouching at the same time. I suppose you can have a blend, but he can't be standing and crouching at the same time. You also maybe want to have him lying prone for shooting purposes. Think of like in Battlefield, in the old Battlefield games where they would lie prone to make themselves a smaller target. And there's also dying. Once the character is dead, he's not going to be walking around unless this is some kind of zombie game, obviously. So we want him to be in very discrete states. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace this simple movement blend space with a state machine. So I'm going to right click and I'll just hit state and you'll get add new state machine right here. And we can name it whatever we want. We can call it navigation. It's fine. So this is the entry node to the state machine. Every state machine has one. It basically says this is where you're starting from. So let's come over here and it says right now place a new node. So we're going to add a state. I'm not going to get into conduits too much. I don't think I'll get into conduits at all, but we're going to add a new state. And this will be the standing state. Now right over here you have animation state events, which are really handy. I don't know if we're going to get to that in the course of doing this, but what this allows you to do is create anim notify events. So when you enter a state, it triggers that event and then you can program whatever you want to have happen. This could be really handy in case of, like, say the character dies and you want him to go in the ragdoll. Well, once he goes into the death state, you can have a custom event here. In the custom event, you turn ragdoll on, for example. So in our standing state, I'm going to navigate back out. These arrows are really good for navigating back out. In fact, if you sit here, if you stretch this out, you can see that we're under navigation in the anim graph. So I'm going to back up one, and I'm going to take this, and I'm going to cut that out. Just Control X. I'm going to go into the standing state. Now, in the standing state, you have this final pose, which is just like this final pose here. Oops. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to paste that in and pop that in. And so now if I back out of there and connect this, the character should behave identical to what we just had. And I know this is being overridden by the event graph, but that used to work. I used to not have to do this. And see, everything works just like it did before. So now we're going to get a little fancy. So we're going to go back into the state machine and we're going to add another state. I'm going to drag off into here and add another state. Now, not only did I create another state, but I created what's called a transition rule. What that is the conditions that have to be met in order to go from standing to this new state, which we will call crouch or crouching. So what are we going to put in here? Well, let's create a new blend space that is similar to our walk here. What are we using for that actually? movement iron sight. So basically we want to have something that is equivalent to this. And it's not going to make much sense if they have different inputs. You could, but I think that would get confusing for our purposes. So let's go ahead and right click, create, oops, no. There we go, let's go animation. Let's go with a 1D blend space, which is what we had before. And we'll call this movement iron sight crouch. So let's search for crouch assets. So we got our idle in there. Let's go ahead and move the idle all the way to the end. And now we want crouch walk forward. I got that guy in there. Let's get rid of that. And there's not really a run. So we'll go ahead and just kind of keep it like this. Now, of course, his max speed is going to be much smaller, so we'll leave it at 100. And we'll call that axis forward motion. Or we can go back and rename it to be whatever the hell we named it the last time. It doesn't really matter, actually, because we're going to drive it through the same variable. So if we come over here, this is our crouching. Got our movement iron sights crouch. And plug that into there. And then we need that variable, which was the movement speed. Now, of course, it's going to be possible. Oops, we got a. Oh, yeah, that's okay. We're getting a warning, but I'm going to get to that. So right now, his movement speed could go way faster than the animation can keep up with. It's possible because the animation is only going to go up to 100, and his motion speed can go way faster than that. So it's going to be up to the pawn to prevent that from happening. The animation blueprint shouldn't be trying to make the speed coincide with the animation. It should be pretty stupid. It should be doing what it's told to do, not trying to tell the pawn what to do, if that makes any sense. The animation blueprint should be subservient to the pawn, not giving orders to the pawn. So we have a warning message here, and I'll show you what that is. What that's basically saying, if we go into our animation blueprint here, is we have two problems with this. One is that we can never actually go into crouching. And why is that? Because we haven't set up this rule. And this rule is basically looking for a Boolean value saying I can go in. Think of this as a gate. And right now this gate is forever closed, which means that we will never go into this state. The second problem is that even if we do go into that state, we can never get back out of the state. Now that in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. If you go into a death state, you might want to make that permanent because you won't ever undie unless you restart the character and respawn them, and in which case things would get reset. A one-way path is not necessarily a bad thing, but in this case we want to go from standing to crouching and then back again. So we need to drag and create a new transition back to standing. So now we have two rules that are undefined. So how are we going to go from standing to crouching? Well, what we need is a flag that says we are crouching. So let's go ahead and add a variable, and we'll call this crouching flag AB. Let's go underscore AB. And so we'll put that in there, and we'll basically say that if crouching flag is on, we go into the crouching, and if crouching flag is not on, then we go back to standing. Let's go ahead and test that. Let's have them come forward a bit, and then go into crouching. Now that doesn't look too bad. Now what's happening is, and this is also another important thing to know, this transition has a blending duration. See here it's at 0.2. So if we wanted that transition to really snap, we can set it to something really, really small. And then really, really small to come back. So let's try that again. So now he's just popping. So we can set these things back. In fact, we can crank it up. Let's go the other direction. Let's make it 2 seconds, which is probably way too high. So again, we'll set it to 100. And he very slowly goes down. And then very slowly comes back up. So that's obviously way too slow. So you can play with that until you get the numbers you like. But this transition, while not too bad, is still not as clean as the animations we have. It looks very mechanical. So let's put in those transitions.